Oregon land use laws, 42 years of success or 42 years of failed planning. Welcome to People, Places, and Politics. I'm Patty Milne. The original goals of that infamous Senate Bill 100 were to reduce housing costs, contain sprawl, protect farm and forest land, and diversify Oregon's industrial base. However, over the last 42 years, which since May 29th, to be exact, 1973, when Governor Tom McCall signed into law that infamous Senate Bill 100, many say all we have done is to adversely affect the economic development that was one of the intentions, attack personal liberties, and also chip away at property rights. Very split opinions on what this law has accomplished or not accomplished. My guest today is Mitch Teal, who is owner and principal broker at Commercial Investment Associates Incorporated. And Mitch has a very long real estate career going back to 1979, and I love your bio. You were working part-time doing some sales and marketing while also working full-time at Caterpillar Industries Incorporated in Dallas. Mm-hmm. But over the years you went back full-time and now have your own brokerage business. But also your longtime involvement, you have been the winner of many awards and recognitions. You've been very involved in the Salem and the Mid-Valley area, serving on all kinds of boards and commissions. I want to mention a couple of them: the Mid-Willamette Valley Advisory Commission on Transportation, and of course these land use laws really brought together, kind of married, if you will, land use planning and transportation along with housing and some other things. So you're very involved and know this topic so very well, and that's why I'm so glad to have you as my guest today. You are also a member of the Board of Directors for Oregonians in Action Education Center.
Correct.
And of course they are the premier group who have helped so many people walk through these interesting regulations and laws that really have put a stranglehold on a lot of people's abilities to use their property and grow the economy and all. One other thing before we talk specifically about the land use laws, and we also want to talk about this 2015 forum, an annual forum that Oregonians in Action put on. But your background also, I think, is really valuable in this discussion. You grew up on a farm in rural Polk County, and I love that you embrace this concept of highest and best use. And many would argue that Oregon land use laws disregard that important concept. And you talk about how it makes sense, using the word C-E-N-T and S, actually, the $ for the S. And your mom was employed for 25 years in the Polk County Assessor's Office. So you know this topic extremely well. So without further ado, to talk about this, as I keep saying, there are two very, very different beliefs, groups of people on both sides of this. It was well intended back when Tom McCall did this in 1973. Yet, what other state in the entire country has ever replicated anything about Senate Bill 100?
None to my knowledge. It hasn't happened.
And why would that be?
Well, it's because it's a very broken system. You know, one of the ways I try to explain it to people, it seems easy to understand for rural property owners who have been the unlucky recipient of suddenly somebody changing what they bought into. I can use my parents as an example. Bought a 15-acre farm right along the Rickrail Creek over in Polk County. Nice piece of property, relatively level and so on, and there was always dreams of development someday because it's just outside the city of Dallas. And they were actually approached to annex their property at one time and fought against it because they didn't feel it was time for the development to occur, and they were still raising their family and so on. years go on, Mom and Dad are thinking about retirement and so on, and certainly by that time land use laws have changed. So what used to be a very wise investment suddenly changed radically. They could no longer make it into a residential subdivision annexed to the city. The sewer line actually comes right through their property where there is an easement, so attachment is quite easy. Where the streets would lay out all makes perfect sense. CENT $. So they ended up not being able to do anything with their ground because it was then zoned EFU. And so they very much feel the impact. When I talk to urban dwellers, people that live in the cities, I some of the times try to get them to understand by saying, well, you live in a neighborhood, don't you? And they said, yeah. And I said, so you probably have single family residential zoning in your area, and they assume that's correct. So I said, play along with me. Imagine if the legislature all of a sudden decided that we're going to pass a new law and we're going to strictly enforce the residential single family concept. So when you want to have guests, you know, you're really impacting the motel industry. They stay with you at your house instead of going down to the motel down the street and eating at the restaurant next door and so on. They eat at your home and they sleep under your roof, and you're taking dollars out of the economy by doing that. So what if we strictly enforce that? You can no longer have a guest at your house overnight. That's a new law right now in place. How do you feel about that? Did that affect your value? Because if you have a 4-bedroom home or more, you know, why would you have all those bedrooms when you can't have guests? So what's the resale on that home? Suddenly now you're buying a lot of square footage for nothing. You're heating it, you're paying the taxes on an escalated value and so on, but now you're limited on what you can do with that property. Imagine, how would that feel? And then suddenly they begin to pay attention and think, you know, I wouldn't like that much. Well, that's exactly what happened to rural property owners. They bought under one philosophy and suddenly had another one thrust upon them. And so here we are with Oregon land use law and trying to struggle our way out from it over the years. So I think that if people can kind of open their minds a little bit, these two factions that you talk about could begin to come a little closer together if they could just understand the other side. So I've known organizations and families that have spent tens of thousands of dollars trying to go through the legal process of getting their property changed from EFU to AR5, even so that they could be 5-acre parcels and build a home on them and so on. And you know, one of the other crazy things in this situation is we can have people that have, you would think, no vested right in having any opinion on this. They can be from anywhere. In fact, I was involved for years in a case over in Polk County where some people that I know quite well wanted to break up a 26-acre parcel and break it into 5 5s with a road through it. And they could do that. It was timber grazing, I think, was the zoning, or farm forest, excuse me. Farm forest was the zoning. And they got approval from all of the county commissioners, and we're moving straight ahead using Sawfield Gregg's law here in town. Mark Shipman, I'm sure you know him well.
Yes.
And so it looked like everything was done, but then some guy that lives out on his parents' farm outside of Independence came in and complained and challenged them to LUBA. And the Land Use Board of Appeals remanded them back to Polk County, and that's where it's set since, because it'll take probably another $30,000 for them to go through the process to get what the county commissioners already blessed. But some unknowing and just, you know, staunch, save the planet kind of person came running forward.
That's one of the real, maybe it was an unintended consequence. Of course, we can't necessarily talk to a lot of the people who, maybe some of them are still around, but that someone with no vested interest, not a neighbor, I mean, what I'm saying, meaning not a neighbor whose property is adjacent, could in some way, shape, or form be adversely affected. But somebody just anywhere can have more control over another individual's property than the owner of the property.
At virtually no expense to them.
Right, and as a county commissioner for just shy of 16 years, we dealt with the measure
37, 49, and 7.
49, and that was heart-wrenching enough. But we also had to, just like your example, we had to deal with several cases similar, where someone said, okay, I can check the box here, I can do this, I can do that, because even as strict as the law is, some people were able to comply. And then you get this clear out of the blue, someone with no interest at all other than who knows what, and just destroy that family's future.
Well, let me continue on the story I was saying in
Please
Polk
do.
County. All of the property was originally owned by one family. It was over 350 acres. They sold off a large piece many, many years ago to a large logging company. They subsequently broke the road in there was an easement created to serve all around there, and they broke off a number of 5-acre pieces and sold them under contract. People have built homes, been living there for years. Not one of those people on that road, and there's probably some in the neighborhood of 15 to 20 dwellings back in there now, not one of them complained about breaking up the balance. That largest piece that's left, only 26 acres of the original farm left. Not one of them complained about the division of this property into 5 5s. Yet this guy completely disassociated, made a stink, and there is a lady that writes up all the appeals for a friendly group.
Yes.
And she ended up prevailing and getting that to the point it's going to cost them a whole lot more money and time in order to do what the county's really already approved.
It would be great to have a law, and of course the legislature needs to do this, is that there has to be some real vested interest, not just that we want to save Oregon from development. And let me state right here in all of this, my experience in government, but also I think my prior to becoming an elected official and all, my business was being a real estate appraiser. And I looked at, I don't know how many, over the years, how many pieces of property that would be out in the middle of nowhere. You have a steep, rocky cliff, a house here, this cliff, kind of out the back door. You go up this real rickety road to get to it, and there's a house up there and maybe a small barn or an outbuilding of some sort. And it's owned DFU. Really? Okay. It's not.
Yeah, it's hard to farm a cliff.
It really is.
Yeah.
So
most challenging part is the irrigation.
Yeah, if there's truly, I support farm and farmers. I always have and I always will.
Me too.
And I want to protect productive farm ground. But again, as a county commissioner listening to these land use cases, there were again and again farmers coming in saying, there's no way we can farm this. Here's what we'd like to do, so that there's some value to my family, my kids. Oh no, can't do it. Because a group would come in and say, well, we're gonna file a lawsuit. There's just something wrong that can happen. So
I agree. Yeah.
Let's protect valuable farm ground. Let's do things that help economic development, but let's protect property rights and people's personal investments.
Absolutely.
That's
That's really a point of one of the reasons I wanted to come talk to you is with my work with Oregonians in Action Education Center. We have the upcoming Land Use Forum. It's been a little change in the way this has been done at Oregonians in Action, because in years past, many people will remember many years in the past where there would be an annual one-time meeting, and it was really for everybody in the state, and it was usually held up in Wilsonville at the Holiday Inn, and everybody would congregate there. Well, it's pretty hard for people from Baker County or Harney County or Coos County or whatever to get up there for a daytime meeting. So what Dave Honeycutt, the executive officer at Oregonians in Action, has done this year is really, I think, the first year that he's really made the strides that he's made. He's had one meeting over in Baker County at Baker City, I believe it was. And then I think he had one down in Douglas County in Roseburg, I believe. And this one is going to be in Polk County over at the Armory coming up November 17th.
Good, good.
So we've brought in a number of good attorneys that are experienced in the area that are going to speak on a variety of subjects. We've got an education provider, and Fidelity National Title has stepped up in that capacity. So now any brokers that want to get continuing hours for their licensing, they can come, and there's 3 additional hours available there. And those will all be certified, and they've submitted all the proper paperwork to do that. And then I just kind of think people need to eat, so I arranged to get Willamette Valley Multiple Listing Service to provide pizza for everybody. And so it's a free lunch, free education for 3 continuing certifiable hours.
All people have to do is sign up.
That's exactly it. It's as simple as signing up. So I will make sure that I provide you the necessary paperwork so that that can be part of the program at the end, and we'll be able to make it easy for everybody.
So to the viewers, there will be information how to sign up at the very end of the program.
Yeah,
yes.
Great.
So what are some of the topics of discussion at the forum? Kind of get people's interest here.
Well, Martha Pagel, who has a substantial history in water in the state of Oregon, will be there. And that's always a great conversation, I think really highlighted this last year by our climatic circumstances. My gosh, if you could pick up a newspaper in the last year and not read about water, you must be reading the funny papers or something. So I think, you know, her presentation would be a great one not to be missed. Dave Honeycutt, the president of Oregonians in Action, will be speaking as well. Sean Gillians, also an attorney who has worked with Oregon Association of Realtors and is in private practice as well, but is very well schooled in issues about land use and so on. And then John Chandler, who is the president of the Home Builders Association locally. If anybody's listened to John before, it's entertaining. Better have your running shoes on. It's kind of like drinking from a fire hose. All those explanations, I think, work with John. It comes at you hard and fast. But it should be a great day of education for everybody and really fill in a lot of gaps for those people. I think that any broker that is going to sell rural property absolutely needs to attend, because there is going to be a lot of information there specific to being able to help clients, and that's really our goal as brokers, to be able to inform them with what might be common knowledge to us that are in the business all the time, but many times
but the laws change so quickly.
And they're so unknown by people that are coming from out of the area. And we have a fair amount of people coming in from out of the area. The wine industry is really taking off, and we have people coming in looking at property, and they think they can do certain things, and it's our job, in my view, to step up and say, slow down a second, cowboy. You know, you might want to think about that. Get your, you know, ducks in a row here, and first steps first, second steps never, you know.
Yes. Oh, good, good. So so this forum will be extremely helpful, and it's going to be especially helpful to brokers. But that doesn't mean that anybody who's interested, for whatever reason, in land use, can't attend.
Absolutely, and I really encourage it. I think one of the other areas that really ought to be paying attention to this are those people that have event centers. So if you've got a little barn out in the hillside somewhere, and you like to have a little wedding gathering, something there, or you've got a vineyard and you know you want to set something up and you think you can use your land for these kinds of purposes, there's been a lot of controversy about that. In fact, legislation has recently been passed in the last few years that limits the amount of activity of that nature that you could have on the property because you're zoned exclusive farm use. And there are some out there that try to get that reinforced in every possible aspect. So there was actually a case in the tax courts in the last couple of years about, have you heard the honeybee situation before?
I'm not sure. Go ahead and share that.
County assessor tried to, they had 20 acres that they were keeping bees on. And the county assessor said, well, we'll give you the exclusive 1 acre out of that 20 for raising your bees, because that's where you have your beehive set. and that the tax reduction for exclusive farm use, the deferment, if you will, or I'm not using the right word, but
tax deferral.
yeah, the tax deferral would apply to that 1 acre, but the other 19 acres we're going to tax ordinarily. And the argument was obviously bees are much like cattle. They may stay in the barn, but they graze everywhere.
Yes.
So they seek nectar all over the 20 acres and come back and make honey out of that. But apparently the assessor in charge of that one didn't understand that, and it, I believe, went to tax court, and that's where the county ended up losing that argument. So the gentleman got to keep his 20 acres under the farm deferral.
Good,
Yeah.
good.
But that's just an example of the misunderstandings that are out there.
There are a lot of what I would call kind of gotchas, little restrictions that just sort of trip people up, and then you got to go. Again, we had a number of these when I was a county commissioner, and I'm sure they are still getting them at Marion County Board of Commissioners. But you'd think, well, what's wrong with this? Well, maybe the road's not in the right way, or maybe they're not open at the right time. And is the ratio of the product they're selling, is it appropriate? I mean, does it meet the test, to just simplify the issue? And you're going, well, for crying out loud, of course it does. Well, you know, they make the farmers just, everything has to fit into this tiny, tiny little funnel, just absolutely perfectly, or sorry, too bad, we're not going to approve this. And you know, where we in government, or when I was, are here to help you. We're here to help you. It's more this kind of beating property owners, and especially those in agriculture, and we all know it's getting much, much more difficult every day to keep an ag operation profitable.
Absolutely.
And if you're not profitable, you go out of business. And farmers have become very creative to do all kinds, and we can look at numerous farm operations around the valley here. They've become very creative in putting on all kinds of, there's the Harvest Festival, there's this, there's that, and you have to. You have to do that. Well, those are huge investments that these farms are making to have the event. And then if you just happen to slip up a little bit and somebody complains, here you are, you know, caught, instead of, well, what can we do to help you solve the problem?
Correct.
So this forum would be very good for anyone looking at trying to diversify their farm operation. Go to the Land Use Forum.
Absolutely.
Tuesday, November 17th in Dallas.
That's right. And that'll
and
be
ask
in
your
the new Armory building on Highway 223. It's supposed to be, I have not been in the facility. I have looked at it on the web and so on, but it's supposed to be a very nice facility, plenty of parking and so on, and it's all free. So there's experts there to ask questions of directly. We've always had great response from the attorneys who come in and speak, to spend additional time with people. They're not going to help them decide their case, but speak in general. And probably a whole lot of hypotheticals are exchanged in that conversation, but you can find help there and certainly get to the people who can help solve your problems if you need to take that next step.
Yeah. Well, I just, as an elected official, I found attending those extremely useful. So any elected official watching this program, be sure to go to this land use forum too. I mean, land use is of special interest to me, but it's also helpful in these land use decisions that elected officials have to,
I would agree,
take care of.
The more background they have, the better decisions they'll make. I'm certain of that. Yeah. Well, I can give you a couple of examples, I think, just recently.
Do.
Yeah.
Maybe this will inspire some people to, there's going to be this kind of discussion at the forum, and maybe this is something I'd really like to attend. So share a couple of quick stories.
Well, one I can tell you that's here local has to do with a power generation company installing some solar panels, and it's all been approved by staff, and everything was good to go. Then a neighbor appealed, and in that appeal they mentioned a number of things, but just off the top of my head I can tell you that they were concerned about the compaction of soils when they mount these solar panels. Well, they never cared when the cows were walking on it. And it's a low value land. We had to have it looked at, and it came back, the majority of the property is low value, even though it was on the maps and the soils maps as high value farm ground. It's not. It's very rocky, very shallow ground, and only has been used as pasture. So anyway, they were concerned about that. They were concerned about the solar panels getting busted, and then some heavy metals leaking out of these solar panels and getting into the water table.
I'm surprised that those would be some of the
concerns.
concerns.
Here's the one that just topped it. They were concerned that nobody had spent time to decide about the noise coming off of these solar panels. Now, I've been to several of these facilities. I've never heard any noise. But they were concerned about that and its effect on right next door. In fact, the property that is setting this up was a commercial dairy operation. They were concerned about how that noise would affect the cows and the milk production and that type of thing. What they fail to understand is they don't know their neighbor at all, and that neighbor sold his cows 23 years ago. There hasn't been a cow milked on that property in 23 years. He has grazed some beef cattle, but that's it. And so the arguments are just ridiculous, yet it slows everything down, costs everybody more money, including government. Then I had a conversation with somebody in an eastern Oregon county just a couple of days ago, and there's a gentleman over there who's currently doing business in Payette, Idaho, right across the Snake River, and wants to move his operation to Vail, Oregon. He used to have an operation in Tillamook County, and right downtown in Tillamook, just like right downtown in Payette, Idaho. And he raises flies. And the people were all upset, and all these rumors are flying around apparently that he's going to bring in dead cattle carcasses and roadkill and who knows what all to draw these flies in. And the flies are apparently used for feed for, I'm not sure, but I think it's chickens or something. And then also used, I think, in the sports industry to actually tie fishing flies and that kind of stuff. So he just raises these things and then sells them. As it turns out, all this hysteria about the dead carcasses and so on, this particular fly is a vegetarian fly.
A vegetarian fly?
Doesn't even go to meat, can't be drawn by carcasses. That's not how it works. And he's had an operation in downtown Tillamook and an operation in downtown Payette. And this is a rural community. Vail is a town of about 1,600 people in Malheur County.
Yeah.
And so, you know, they have to squawk. You know, they don't know why or what, but by gosh, let's make a stir about it.
Well, that would be another law that really ought to be, again, that not having a direct interest, but also somehow dealing with this. A lot of the strategy is simply stalling and hopefully just running the property owner out of money and time and patience and
Exactly right.
That's just not a way to run things. We're running out of time, so there will be information, the Oregonians in Action, the 2015 Land Use Forum, Tuesday, November 17th, the Dallas Armory, the new one, 12:30 to 3:30, so sign up. Everything, including lunch, is free, and thank you, Mitch, for being my guest and
my
sharing
pleasure.
this information.
Yeah, thank you, Patty.
Okay.
Always great seeing you.
Good.